One of the things that I would want to call out is loss of funding. So if, for example, we procure in an emergency and we jump a lot of processes, procedures, and we do it inappropriately, the funders are going to come and relook at the project when they're doing the evaluation, and it might actually result in loss of funding and bad reputation, even for the organization that we are representing. So it is very key that we still follow process, even in emergencies. Like Ronald said, there are so many other, you can actually have a process, a single source justification process that can actually be applied even in emergencies, and that can be properly documented. It's clear in terms of who approves the single source justification, who reviews it, and the whole team can actually be involved and add more value before the procurement decision is made.
The strategy is looking at risk. What is it that can affect the delivery of goods and services? That's the first thing that the strategy needs to look at. And then you say, how do we mitigate risk at the same time fulfilling our role in an organization? So what we saw in the past 18 months is that most organizations, private and government institutions, they demonstrated a lack of that expertise in the procurement strategies, because everyone really was caught unawares. And unfortunately, the corrupt tendencies then emerged out of this whole process. And I think it was also systemic Hemant, in the sense that where procurement processes are not matured enough, the level of maturity in the procurement process was not really good, then it gets ignored in the process. I can tell you in many instances, procurement was ignored. Procurement was never consulted in making some of these decisions. And procurement then became an afterthought. Now we have a problem. What do we do? Procurement people come and clean up this process. I think it gives us a chance to elevate the role of procurement in our organizations, be it private or public, and also particularly commenting on what Sandra is doing. The third sector organizations that rely by funding. Now, we need to anticipate some of these problems, because immediately our procurement processes are not foolproof. The funders then withdraw their funding, and what happens? So I think it's a lesson to all of us that let's develop procurement strategies that are geared for such unforeseen circumstances.
How do you separate to say this is an agent, this is an emergency procurement, or this is poor planning? I think there's a very thin line between those two issues, and we might need to really separate to say, when this happens, you are clear to say this is poor planning. When this happens, you are clear to say it's an emergency procurement. So we might need to perhaps just get 1 or 2 pointers or indicators from you, how you can clearly separate these two thin lines, so that at least people are not taking poor planning as emergency planning, just as you highlighted in the introduction to your presentation as well. That's, I think, the question that I can pose for myself. Thank you.
Okay, can I respond? Thank you. In many cases, yes, we may say there's a thin line between poor planning and emergency, but in my view, there isn't. These two items are so distinct. And from a procurement perspective, because you see the trend, okay? Why is everything coming at the last minute? I think in one of my words there was lastminute.com. Why is everything coming at the last minute? That should give you insight that, is this deliberate? Now, from a poor planning is a result of a reactive procurement process. So beginning of the year, when we finalize our budgets, which then inform our procurement plans, we need to agree in terms of when is this item going to be needed in the organization. Okay, so we built in our lead times in there, we built in our supply market information, and we know when. In my view, probably to Newton, thing that will also constitute poor planning, it's the red tape that exists between the within the organization. I always split lead time into two, the controllable and the uncontrollable. So the controllables of the lead times are the internal processes. At what point do you realize that you need to buy something? That's controllable. That is within us as an organization. If our procurement processes are long unnecessarily, that process can take almost, let's say, 30 days to finalize. Then you get to a point of issuing a purchase order, an RFQ, to make suppliers respond. Then suppliers respond to their quotations or whatever they say. It will take us 30 days to deliver after receipt of a purchase order. Automatically, that's 60 days of planning. So if our procurement process is only concentrating on the 30 days from the supplier, but is not concentrating on the internal processes, then before you know it, that constitutes an emergency. But that emergency is as a result of poor planning, lack of synchronization of processes, and lack of understanding of the internal lead time. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. Thank you for that, Ronald. Sandra, do you wanted to add something, Sandra?
So I wanted to comment actually and to say in addition, this is Mobola here. I must apologize. My video isn't working, but I'm working on it. But I think another key to tell the difference is looking at what category, what item is it that is constituting the emergency. You can't have an emergency for, especially indirect procurement items, pencils or stationery. That's not an emergency. You should know that you need that item. You should already know. So I think with the pandemic, it's obvious. It's things like PPE and so on. But there's some categories that I believe should never ever fall into that emergency category. They should always be planned for. They're part of our annual planning. We should have master agreements, suppliers already in place in line to deliver those.